back, and good afternoon to all our viewers, all our listeners. Really happy to be doing this series and the feedback. So this is a really important topic. So we're dealing with being vulnerable. This is part 2, and this is how to become more vulnerable in our relationships. Now, this was really a big deal for me, because when I look back on my own life, I mean, in my adolescence, I wasn't vulnerable at all. So even like with my best friend, she would share so many things about her life that was happening, and I'll just be the good listener. I wouldn't be talking about 90% of the things that was going on in my life. I wasn't vulnerable at all. And I think when I look back, part of that is that I came from a family where we didn't talk about emotions. You didn't talk about how you felt. You just had to, things happen and you push through and you deal with life. So I know that had a big part in me. So when I look back, I wonder what type of friend I was, though. That's where it seemed, kind of one way. And even so that this has really been a work in progress for me. This becoming more vulnerable has really been a work in progress, because too, having some, traumatic situations in my own life, even at the age of 16, some stranger want to assault you, trying to assault me. These things is like, this place not safe, people not safe, men not safe. So really holding back a lot of what I felt, what I wanted, what I needed, what I think, because of some traumas also. So I think this is just so important, because you cannot have a healthy intimate relationship or healthy intimate relationships if we are not vulnerable in our relationships. So of course, this is a series, important relationship skills, and I am looking at number 4, being vulnerable, and this is part 2. And let's remember that relationship skills are a set of skills that help you to form healthy, happy, and strong connections. Now, Kelly Gonzalez, relationship coach, says that in relationships, being vulnerable is an act of showing someone exactly who you are and how you feel without disguise, bravado, or ego defenses, exposing yourself to the possibility of hurt or rejection. And I know, even in my own journey, what helped is as I grew in Christ and realized that I'm a powerful being in Christ, that I have intellectual power, spiritual power, emotional power. I can say no, I can set boundaries. So being vulnerable is not that scary, and me being rejected a lot of times is not an indication that something is wrong with me. It really has to do a lot of times with the other person and where they are at. So, understanding these things really helped me in working on being more open, being more vulnerable in my relationships, even accepting myself, the good, the bad, and ugly, and, spending time with God, sharing who I was, telling him how I felt about things. These things really helped me in becoming more vulnerable in relationships. Now, as adults, being vulnerable can be very scary. So this is something that you actually have to make a conscious decision, right? To not hide yourself, to not hide self. Especially if as adults, you find this is something you still battle with, you have to make a conscious decision to work on it. Now, I would have shared 15 examples of emotional vulnerability from mindbodygreen.com in their article, How to Be Vulnerable. I'm just sharing 10 of them. So if persons are tuning in today for the first time on this topic, they could understand when I say vulnerable, what some of those behaviors look like. So 1, directly telling someone that you think they are cool and are interested in getting to know them better. So we're looking at some actions that show vulnerability, emotional vulnerability. 2, letting someone know that something they said hurt your feelings. 3, telling someone when you are feeling ashamed or embarrassed. 4, acknowledging when you have made a mistake and apologizing for it. 5, asking for feedback on a project, that you care a lot about and you worked hard on, and you know how scary that could be. Number 6, asking for help. Number 7, listening to someone explain a way in which you have hurt them without trying to explain what happened or defend your character. 8, letting people know about your personal insecurities or struggles. 9, talking openly about your negative emotions, such as fear, anger, disappointment, or jealousy, without trying to cover them up or deflect from them. And number 10, believing and trusting in someone, putting your faith in them that they will come true for you. So these are just 10 examples of what it looks like to be emotionally vulnerable. And in the last program, I'm not going to go into it today, I shared on the difference between vulnerable and open. So a person can be open, but yet still not share the deeper parts of themselves. Now, what does a fear of vulnerability look like, right? Someone who fears vulnerability may be timid and pull back or withdraw from most conversations, but that's not really how most people who fear vulnerability show up, right? So a lot of times they could show up as a person who may seem comfortable with social interactions and come across as friendly and engaged, right? They can do this because they have figured a basic persona to display and interact with others. So this is how I'm going to interact with others, while who they are is still closely guarded. So they seem warm and friendly and engaging, but to really get down to the nitty-gritty of who they are, what they want, what they need, even sometimes in marriages, they are not showing up like that, right? There are behaviors we display that are indicators of a fear of vulnerability. And I just identified 3 of them. So behaviors that we display that are indicators of a fear of vulnerability. The first one is a tendency to escalate. A tendency to escalate. So people who fear vulnerability may have learned that before, right? Learn that when things get tense, when you start to feel stuff and feelings become involved, it is better you get extremely upset, right, before the other person does. And this leads them to escalate emotionally much faster than seemingly necessary. So you know what? I am feeling these things. And what I'm going to do, I just get upset. And you know what? That keeps the person away. People pull away. It ends the conversation, right? We can no longer communicate well. And this is an indication that somebody may have a fear of being vulnerable. So once we get into sharing emotions, we get into what I really want and what I really need, start to escalate. And therefore, stop being vulnerable, because we know that anger and upset and irritation and annoyance are secondary emotions, and they are protective emotions, and the more vulnerable emotions lay under that. And secondly, there's a tendency to drift. Have you ever connected with a friend or co-worker, right? And then suddenly the conversation seemed to decrease, right? You eventually realize that, wait, no, I haven't heard from this person in a long while, or they haven't responded, to my messages. People get busy, and we understand that. So we know that people have different things going on in their life. Seasons are different. But for people who fear intimacy, this is a common strategy. So we start talking, we start sharing, and we start feeling like we're getting connected, and we just seem to just fade away or drift away. Some people even ghost people, if we still use that word. You just lock off and you don't even know what happened. They just stop interacting and communicating. And that is an indication that there may be a fear of vulnerability happening there. And then there's the lashing out, right? So our culture is full of stories of romantic partners who suddenly turn cold or even get angry. Small problems just escalate into huge issues, and the ability to compromise just seems to evaporate. People who fear vulnerability will deploy this behavior without thought. Once they start to feel that they are becoming close to someone, they start to feel anxious and they lash out or shut down. I know one of the things for me is I would say I'm okay. So I'm not okay, but I'll say, yeah, I'm cool, I'm okay. Like I don't want to ask for what I want. I don't want to ask for what I need. And of course, that cannot be healthy in an intimate relationship. Or sometimes, I might show some kind of passive aggressive behavior. It's like, you should know that I need this, so I want this. And I get upset, but nobody can read your mind. But remember, asking for what you need and sharing how you feel is a vulnerable position. And for some of us, that is difficult. But if our relationships have to grow and be healthy, and if we have to grow and be healthy, we need to be able to ask. We need to be able to share. Yes? Now, what hinders us from being vulnerable? Now, I shared on this in part 1, so really I am just going to be summarizing. Remember that we are not born being afraid of vulnerability. We're not born like that, right? But over time, of course, we develop this fear through life experiences. So things like trauma, where once there's trauma, the world actually feels like a place that is somewhat or very dangerous. Once we have traumatic experiences, and it is hard to see yourself trusting people after you've been hurt, especially if these were persons who are supposed to love and care for you. So having traumatic experiences like things like sexual abuse and abandonment, so parents or loved ones, abandoning you, or you just, doing something that you think is good and everybody laughing at you or ridiculing you in some way. These things can feel traumatic and cause you to, be afraid of being vulnerable. Of course, rejection. So severe rejection can feel traumatic, but even smaller episodes of rejection can trigger a fear of vulnerability. And then we also have our family or cultural expectations. So of course, if you grew up believing that vulnerability was bad or wrong, or if people expected you to be brave and tough at all costs, if you grew up believing that showing feelings were a sign of weakness, it of course will be no surprise that vulnerability is challenging. So those are some of the reasons, and I would have shared on it in the first program. So of course, what I'm dealing with today, really want to dive into, is overcoming your fear of vulnerability and how to become more vulnerable in your relationships. So I would have, apart from just my own work with myself, my work from clients. So I'm sharing, this is more than, I'm sharing from minimalismmadesimple.com, fear vulnerability, and willowcounseling.org, what makes us so afraid of being vulnerable. A lot of what you're going to hear also is coming from my own work on myself and my work with clients, right? So looking at how do we work on becoming more vulnerable. Very important is to know your triggers and understand why you feel fear when you are vulnerable. So we have triggers, we have things that makes vulnerability feel scary. being rejected in the past, and other painful emotions may be triggers for you. Try to understand why a situation made you feel so vulnerable and what you can think or do when those feelings arise. So know your triggers, right? Know your triggers for feeling vulnerable. And some of us, when we look at our lives, we only feel vulnerable in certain situations. So there are spaces where we feel we can share. And some people, I see it come up, especially in marriages, in certain situations, very difficult for the person to share what they want and what they need in certain spaces. So know them, know them. Identify your safety behaviors. So when we feel vulnerable, we do certain things to feel safe. What are the things that you do to protect yourself from feeling exposed or vulnerable? You say no to social settings, so, right? You don't initiate conversation. You don't say how you truly feel. So like me, I'm okay, I good. No, it's okay. That is my safety behavior, right? And I have really tried, like even when I say it, I'll say, no, that's not true. I am not okay. This is what is happening. So what we want to do is to try to do the opposite of your safety behavior. It may feel uncomfortable at first, or even at the thought of it, of doing the not safe thing, but do it. It will build up your tolerance for vulnerability. So know what your safety behaviors are, and you see yourself doing it, do the opposite. Do the opposite. So I am upset with Tiffany because she did not realize that I needed help, and she asked me if I'm okay. My safety behavior is, yeah, I gotta know, I cool. Jesus is Lord. Right? No, I need to do the opposite. No, Tiffany, I am not okay, to be honest. I really would have wished you would have done so and so and so. But in all honesty, I never even told you that I needed help. So you wouldn't even know. But in situations like this, I would really appreciate it if you would do X, Y, and Z. That is being vulnerable. So push past the safety behavior and do the opposite. And the more you do that, it builds up your tolerance for vulnerability. You need to have some self-compassion. Self-compassion is kind of being compassionate on yourself. You know, sometimes we are our hardest critic. We beat up on ourselves even more than anybody, right? Stop beating up on yourself every time you make a mistake. The important thing is to learn from them, learn from your mistake, right? We are all human beings who need God. We need God desperately. We're not perfect. We don't have everything together. We have brokenness in our lives. Now, if this is hard to do, right? If it's hard for you to have some compassion on yourself, you know, think about what, you know, if your friend or a loved one or even your child, or even if you don't have children, if you had a child, what would you say and do to him or her if they experience what you are experiencing, or if they did what you did? What would you say if this were your child or this were your friend? We have to learn to be a little bit more compassionate if we have to grow and change, right? Try being kinder to ourselves. Try a lot of times validating, you know, ourselves and saying what God says about us instead of, you know, that critic that is in our mind a lot of times. The next thing we need to do is to connect with others who share your values and support your growth. It's important for us to be around persons who support us growing, who share our values. Being with persons who understand and appreciate vulnerability is a very powerful way to grow and heal in this area. It could be one or two family members. You know, you have those family members who compassionate and they sometimes you're amazed, wow, it's so easy for them to say how they feel and ask what they want. And it's like, wow, right? Be around them. It could be a support group. It could be persons in your church community who are not afraid to be honest and open and speak the truth in love. And they are reliable in supporting you. This can make a big difference. Embrace vulnerability in other people. Embrace vulnerability in other people. Try to find role models in people who can embrace who they are. Look for those who know their flaws and speak openly about it. Likewise, tune in to your loved ones when they share important details about their lives with you. Practice active listening to truly hear, and aim to stop judging people for their experiences. Just listen, to understand, to hear, okay, I can see how that makes sense, right? Based on who this person is, right? The more we can sit with others as they reveal themselves, the more familiar you will become with different emotions, and it helps you in being able to see, okay, this is part of the human experience. It is okay, right? And I'm always just amazed by even scriptures in the Bible that talk about us being vulnerable. So confessing your faults one to another, praying for one another that you may be healed. That's a vulnerable situation. Even where Paul would have sought God many times, it says 3 in the Bible, take this from me, and God said, listen, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made manifest in your weakness. So Paul being able to confess his weakness and seeking God's help. And even if we look at the Beatitudes, blessed are those who hunger and thirst, blessed are the poor. Those are vulnerable positions, and to be able to say, listen, I am poor, I need help, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. Those are vulnerable positions, but it is in those vulnerable positions that we find love and we find peace, we find joy, we find the grace of God, right? So next thing, be honest with yourself about your thoughts and feelings. Please don't lie to yourself. Don't lie to yourself. Makes no sense. Be honest with yourself about how you truly feel about everything. Remember, feelings are neither right nor wrong. And this really, really helped me in being vulnerable. Just being able to acknowledge all my feelings, right? Be honest with yourself about how you think about a matter, even if you are in a minority. If you cannot give yourself that kind of honesty, you cannot be honest with others, and you will not be growing and changing in ways that really matter, right? Feelings are neither right nor wrong. Be honest about how you really feel, because once you start being honest about how you feel, then you can really begin to process things on a different level, and you can learn how to ask for what you need and what you want. Seek feedback from people you trust. Seek feedback from people you trust. This could be a friend, a family member, a counselor. Sometimes we wonder if something is wrong with us, as we move forward in our lives, trying to grow and to make changes, with respect to ourselves and our relationships. We wonder at times, are my feelings normal? Are my thoughts healthy? Talk to someone. And if the feedback is not what you expected, it could give you a very valuable perspective. So sometimes, you talk and your feedback may not be what you expected, but it gives you a different perspective on what you're thinking. Acknowledge your fears and give yourself permission to feel them. No one enjoys feeling fear or fearful, but it's a normal part of life. When we don't acknowledge our fears, it only makes them worse. And the truth about it is that they can be running the show from the background. You're not acknowledging them doesn't mean that they're not impacting you. Not acknowledging how we feel doesn't mean it's not impacting us, right? Face the fear with God's grace and wisdom and work through it. So acknowledge them. Do not be afraid. So we're looking at how to become more vulnerable. Do not be afraid to ask for help when you need it. It is okay to ask for help. No man is an island. We are not independent. We are interdependent, right? Asking for help does not mean you are weak. God actually designed us to work in community, helping each other. And we have to remember, a person can't just look at you and know the help that you need. There's sometimes you can see a situation and know that a person needs help in certain ways. But many times in relationships, you can't, right? Remember, a person cannot read your mind, right? We were made to help each other. And we know, and I know, that asking for help can be scary, especially if we interpret no as a rejection of us. So somebody says no to me, and I see that as them rejecting me, or something being wrong with me, or I'm not good enough. Start by reaching out to someone you trust and let them know what is going on. Most of the time, he or she will be more than happy to help. Find safe people. Find safe people. The journey of vulnerability often consists of thousands of baby steps. One of those first steps, including finding even one person where you can start being a little more honest. This does not mean you have to delve into your life story immediately. Trust can take time, and it's okay to feel a bit cautious, a little bit wary. That's normal, right? But engaging in self-disclosure becomes easier the more you do it. Just make sure you practice with people who can validate, support, and encourage you, right? So find safe people and seek counseling. Seek counseling. If you're afraid of being vulnerable, counseling can offer tremendous relief and proactive solutions for change. Your therapist can help you explore your vulnerability triggers, and together you can identify safe steps to make progress with yourself and others. So sometimes we need to engage the help of a counselor. And remember that vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. Vulnerability is not a weakness. Vulnerability in a broken world requires strength and bravery. So people who have chosen the path to, and they decided they are going to be vulnerable and truly show up in their intimate relationships, they are brave and they are strong. And we thank God by his grace, because he's our source, because we get identity from him and worth from him, that we can be vulnerable in our intimate relationships, right? So talk to God, tell him everything, hide nothing from him, tell him the good, bad, and the ugly, and allow him to continue to heal you, because he cares. And this is a space, spending time with God, really sharing how you are doing, what you are feeling. And I see this so much in the Psalms with David crying out to God. This starting just to be vulnerable in that space really helps you in your other intimate relationships in your life. Now, how to become more vulnerable in your, especially things like marriages and stuff like that, right? And of course, it applies to all relationships. So just saying some more here. We all know that there's a potential for deep hurt in all relationships, but if you want to develop deeper trust in your intimate relationships, you must be willing to share areas that feel private or where you feel vulnerable. This could be sharing about your fears and struggles or exposing aspects of yourself that you do not consider attractive. In other words, trust is developed when our partners have the chance to let us down or hurt us, but do not. We feel more trusting in relationships where loved ones freely share the vulnerable, painful aspects of their lives with us. So, what are some of the things we need to do to strengthen connections when it comes to vulnerability? And psychalive.org shared: 1, ask for what you need. Ask for what you need. When we are hurting, it is easy to dismiss our pain or try to protect ourselves and the people around us by closing off. And many of us can identify with this. Achieving close connections mean being willing to speak up when we are in need. Admitting that we need someone to lean on or that we are struggling or need help allows our loved ones to feel for us and respond to us in ways that bring us closer. So sometimes you don't want him to leave home. Tell him that. Don't act like it's okay. No, love, I really would like you to stay home and spend some time with me. But now you want to say that. You want to sound so vulnerable and like you're needy, right? But yes, don't. No, I good, I okay, right? And you, by the time you leave, you're vexed, you leave, you're vexed. No, ask. I'd like to get a hug, please. Ask for what you need, right? I really would like you to pray for me. Secondly, be willing to expose your feelings. Sometimes we are afraid to expose our feelings, even to ourselves. But acknowledging and accepting our feelings is an important part of being in touch with ourselves and sharing ourselves with others. A big part of strengthening our connection involves being willing to share how we feel with someone. Remember, again, I have shared this many, many times. Your deepest level of intimacy is knowing how each other feels. That's the deepest level of intimacy, knowing how each other feels. And the thing about it is that God always shares how he feels with us, right? Say what you want. Say what you want. Say what you want. So sometimes you're there dealing with couples, right? And they're very, very good at saying exactly what they don't like and what they don't want, right, from their partner. And this, of course, leads to a lot of tit for tat, a lot of back and forth. You're getting nowhere. And from the time they start sharing what they really want, what they really need, right, from their partner, you start to see a sadness and a opening up and a being vulnerable. Their voices start to soften and the expressions, soften. And often their partner feels no longer, on the defensive. Their body language changed. They start turning towards each other, right? And feeling for the other person. It is touching to see the connection people feel for each other when they are strong enough to be vulnerable and say exactly what they want. So many times in relationships, it is easier to say what we don't want. We need to start saying what we do want, right? And express what you really think. So in addition to expressing what you want and what you need, it's important to be honest about your point of view and showing your real selves. Our relationship should be a space in which we are not afraid to say what we really think. This does not mean being insensitive or unnecessarily hurtful, but it does mean offering an authentic exchange. We should be open to giving and receiving feedback without being overly defensive. Remember that we are all human and therefore flawed, and this can help us have more compassionate and interest as we engage in more honest exchanges. So express what you really think. And the last one is to slow down and be present. Part of being vulnerable is being willing to be in the moment with someone. When we listen to our critical inner voice or spend a lot of time in our heads, we can miss out on intimacy. Look our loved ones in the eye, listen to what they have to say, and be willing to give time and attention to the moment. And those things are acts of vulnerability and are often harder than we imagine. Yet engaging in each of these behaviors keep us closer to one another and to our own feelings. So I want to close there. And when somebody shares something vulnerable, please don't throw it back at them. Please, please, please be safe. Be a safe space for your loved one to be vulnerable. Yeah.